Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we are breaking down the main slate for Saturday, October 6, 2024, week 6 of the college football season. We've now started conference play pretty much universally around the board. We have 4 or 5 games of a lot of these teams to look at in terms of a sample size. This is really going to be the point in the season where we actually know what these teams are going to do. We know how they want to win, and we know what their opponent's strengths and weaknesses are. And so those are going to be things that we can all exploit in DFS if we are very intelligent in how we do so. And so on this episode, we're going to break down all 14 games of the Saturday main slate and tell you what you can expect from each game, as well as who and how we need to be targeting each game, and just give you guys solid advice for building solid DraftKings lines for this weekend all the way through. Now, if you have not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We will be doing college football DFS picks and preview shows for the entirety of the college football season, as well as college basketball when that starts up. And in addition to our weekly NFL and golf content, our episode for the Sanderson Farms Championship for the PGA Tour, that is out already. Our episode for the college football Thursday night slate is out already. So make sure you check out those on the channel feed if you have not already. But without further ado, we got 14 games to break down. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so game number 1 on the slate is a showdown in the SEC. Missouri heading to College Station to take on Texas A&M. The Aggies are currently 2-point favorites with a total of 48.5. Lines courtesy of our friends at ESPN Bet, meaning the implied total in this game is about 25 to 23 in favor of Texas A&M. I do not do decimal points for the implied totals because you can't actually score 0.5 points on a football field. So rounding it off, about 25 to 23 in favor of the Aggies. Now, on the Missouri side, Brady Cook, their quarterback, he was really good last season. He's generally pretty good, but he really hasn't had a game where he's, cooked yet this season. He's had one game with 26 fantasy points, but that was against Buffalo. That was the biggest game he had. And he really hasn't had a true ceiling game the way we saw him have a few last year. We know it's in there with Brady, but against Texas A&M, I don't think that's a super likely outcome. I do think this is one of the best defenses in the SEC. I don't think that $7,500 is a bad price point for Brady. I do not think that this is a game. Well, I do think that this is a game you could game stack on both sides and get a lot of pieces from. But overall, all in all, Brady Cook at $7,500, not the slate's best play, not the slate's worst play. At the running back position, this really started off with a committee between Nate Noel and Marcus Carroll. And Nate Noel does appear to be the lead dog now, back-to-back games of 22 and 24 carries. Texas A&M has given up some decent running back performances versus Notre Dame and Arkansas. So if Nate Noel, if you're telling me he's going to get 24 carries against this A&M defense, and he's generally pretty involved in the passing game, averaging 3 catches per game, I think this is a pretty good spot for Nate Noel at $6,000. I think he's one of the best points per dollar plays at the running back position on the slate. At the wide receiver position, the good news is with Missouri, whether you want to stack Brady Cook, whether you want to play one of these guys as one-offs, whether you want to stack the whole game, they only throw to 2 guys, and it's Luther Burden III, LB3 as I call him, and Theo Weiss Jr. So Luther Burden III is one of the best best receivers in all of college football. He's really came on strong the last 2 games, 26 and 25 fantasy points in those games, routinely targeted in double digits. Last week he had 10. I think he is probably objectively one of the slate's top plays at wide receiver. I would probably rank him in terms of, if you were to say, hey, Mike, who is the most likely receiver to end this slate leading it in points, I would probably have him ranked at number 2 on that board. And then Theo Weiss is a transfer from Oklahoma. He had 9 targets last week. So again, the condensation of this team's passing game around these 2 guys makes it really easy to target. Next up, we got the Aggies, and they've got some quarterback issues. Connor Weigman started the season for them, and I drafted him a lot in best ball. I really was a believer in him and what he had done as a starter, but it really didn't look all that good while he was healthy. So we don't really know how he's going to look when he comes back. I think that the backup who has been playing, Marcel Reed, is a better fit for this offense. I think Marcel Reed is a better DFS play because of his lower price tag and his rushing upside. He's had double-digit rush attempts in every start and looked pretty good doing it. So honestly, the way that this shakes out, I think that Weigman is not a terrible play if he's active, but I think Reed is a really solid play if Weigman is out. And the good news is we should be able to know this before 12 p.m. kickoff because this is a part of the early wave. I think Reed's a really good play if Weigman's out. At the running back position, Le'Veon Moss, I do think, is a better play if Marcel Reed is at quarterback. This team has gone more run heavy when Reed is at quarterback. I don't think that Missouri is exactly a great defense. I don't think that they're a bad defense either. $5,500, it's not an unreasonable play to me. At the wide receiver position, Noah Thomas is the guy that I want. He is a big play guy. We saw that last week against Arkansas, 6 catches, 109 yards, and 1 touchdown, 25.9 fantasy points. He was also the leading target getter in the offense with 11 targets. Marcel Reed clearly had a really good connection for him. So it's kind of like a give or take, because the bonus that you get with Marcel Reed starting is that Reed clearly is looking for him. The bonus that you get with Weigman starting is that there's very clearly going to be more passing volume to go around, because he's going to be running less. They're going to be throwing more. So I really do think in either way, Noah Thomas, pretty solid value play at $3,800. Now, before we continue, I do want to mention this is a 14-game slate, so I'm going to try to go pretty quickly on like ruling guys in or out, mainly because I don't want to be here for 2 hours. And also because last week it was not a good week for me. I played too big of a player pool. With it being a 13-game slate, I talked myself into a lot of different players, a lot of different combinations. And so, even though I had a lot of the guys that you quote had to have last week, I had a decent amount of Avery Johnson. I had a decent amount of Jack Beck, TC wide receiver. The lineups that I had with them together had other plays that just kind of, sunk my lineups. And so really, I never ended up on the right combination because my player pool was so big. I was trying to play too many players. If I had just settled on a few, then I would have played those players with more combinations around them and ended up being, better off for it. So really, that's going to be something I'm going to try to focus on going forward, is narrowing down my player pool. And on a 14-game slate, it gets more important, which, quick side note, who asked for a 14-game slate? I think 12 was the perfect size. 12 was a little big as it is. 14 games is a lot. It caused me to do a lot of research. So we're going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. Now, game number 2, Boston College taking on Virginia. Virginia is currently 2.5-point favorites with a total of 50.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 26-24 in favor of the Cavaliers. For Boston College, Thomas Castellanos, their dual threat quarterback, is questionable. I'm quite interested in him if he plays. I think this is a really solid game to stack. I think the lines right now are currently reflective of Thomas Castellanos not playing. If he does not play, Grayson James is the next guy up. He started against Western Kentucky. He was okay. He is not the runner that Castellanos is. He does not have the upside that Castellanos does, but on DraftKings, he's priced at $8,300. I'm interested in Castellanos if he's active. I'm not interested in Grayson James if he's not. At the running back position, this has been a committee all season long that we've been monitoring. Kai Robichaux did lead the committee against Western Kentucky with 18 carries, turned it into 14.1 fantasy points. Meanwhile, Trayshawn Ward continues to see consistent usage in the passing game, but only 6 carries against Western Kentucky. If the scales continue to be flipped towards Robichaux, then I'm going to continue to play him in DFS, especially if he is the cheaper back between the two of them. $4,200 is not a bad price point for Robichaux. At the wide receiver position, Boston College doesn't really throw to a whole lot of different guys. Well, I mean, they do, but they throw to them once. There's very few guys that get repeat targets game in, game out. Lewis Bond is one of them. Had a pretty solid outing, if I must say so, against Western Kentucky. 7 catches. Now, granted, he didn't do a whole lot with them, only resulted in 21 yards, but the team was very devoted to getting him the football. And to me, that bodes well for him the rest of the season. Jaron Bradley, the Texas Tech transfer, was also he's seeing his usage ramp up as the season goes on. He did score a touchdown against Western Kentucky for the 2nd straight game. I don't think he's a terrible value play at $3,800. On the Virginia side, they've got a really exciting but overpriced quarterback in Anthony Colandrea. He is a dual threat. He is quite good. He can put up numbers in a hurry, but he's priced up at $9,200. And when you think about DFS, you always want to get 3 times value for their salary at least. So at $9,200, we need 27, 28 fantasy points out of him to consider it a good outing. And I just don't think that that's all that likely. Against the better defenses he has played, he has not looked as good. In Boston College, I would consider closer to the likes of Maryland and Coastal Carolina than I would Wake Forest or Richmond. So I do think that this is not a terrible spot for Colandrea, but for me, he is a game stack only play if I'm looking to really stack this game up and hope that it goes nuclear. At the running back position, I do think Kobe Pace is a little bit underpriced. He is a workhorse. I do think you can run on Boston College, so I don't think that this is a bad spot for him at only $4,900. At the wide receiver position, it's pretty easy to figure out for Virginia. That's the good news. Malachi Fields is their clear alpha. Only 6 targets against Coastal Carolina, but 2 of them were touchdowns, 22.5 fantasy points. I think he's a little overpriced. Personally, I would rather play Luther Burden. But I think if you're looking to stack the game up or stack this team up, he's the guy you want to start with. Trell Harris is their wide receiver too, very clearly second in the pecking order. Did not play against Coastal Carolina. He's supposed to be back this week. And then Chris Tyree, I'm going to continue to bang the drum for. I'm just a believer in this guy's a really good athlete. This guy is used in the slot role that was used by Malik Washington last year. I think that he's going to get there at some point. I'm going to continue to bang the drum for Tyree. He's only $3,800. He will make my player pool, but probably not be a super large part of it. Game number 3 is SMU heading to Louisville to take on the Cardinals, and it just seems crazy that this is an ACC game, but it is. Louisville is 7-point favorites for a total of 57.5 points, meaning the projected game score is about 32-25 in favor of Louisville. For SMU, look, they're one of the most frustrating teams in all of DFS, but one thing is clear now, Kevin Jennings is going to be the starter moving forward, and he's been not bad in his last 2 starts, 18 fantasy points against TCU, 23 against Florida State. And he is a runner. He hasn't really shown a whole lot of that upside yet, hasn't scored a rushing touchdown since week 1. So really, I'm interested to see what is going to happen with Jennings as the season moves forward. If he's going to be the starter, I think he's going to have some very high upside weeks. $6,200. I don't know if he's going to make my final player pool or not, but he's got my interest because of the upside that he brings and the fact that Louisville did have trouble stopping Riley Leonard on the ground last week. I think it's a pretty good matchup for him. At the running back position, SMU is notorious for playing a committee of guys going back to last season. Brashad Smith has been killing it because all of those other guys had been hurt. Now they're supposed to get LJ Johnson Jr. back for this game. To me, that makes Brashad Smith a lot harder to play because if LJ Johnson is going to be eating into his volume, then it's just going to lessen the chances that he has to put up fantasy points. And at $7,800, I want every bite at the apple that I can possibly get. I think he's a little too expensive now that LJ Johnson is supposed to be back. At the wide receiver spot, I'm going to the next team. I'm not talking about these SMU wide receivers anymore. Hudson's talented. Bailey's consistent. RJ Maryland's the tight end, probably their best overall player. They're going to rotate guys, though, which really depresses the upside of all of them. They're all touchdown or bust plays. There, I did it. Hope y'all are happy. At the quarterback spot, Louisville has Tyler Shuck at quarterback, who is, to me, a high floor option. He's had over 20 fantasy points in every game. The SMU defense is certainly nothing to write home about. I think he is very likely to be in that 20 to 25 range like he's been all 4 games, which makes him a solid play in cash games, but really lacks the GPP upside that I am looking for. Probably not going to make my player pool. At the running back position, Maurice Turner is questionable for this one. I don't think he plays. It apparently is a high ankle sprain that he suffered against Georgia Tech, which means he'll be out for a few weeks, I think. So Isaac Brown was the guy that ended up being the lead dog in the backfield. I played a lot of Don Chaney last week because everything seemed to indicate that Don Chaney would be the lead back. It was not. It was Isaac Brown. Isaac Brown was also used in the passing game, caught 4 passes, one of which was a touchdown. So I think Isaac Brown as the lead dog in this backfield certainly has my interest at $4,300. And then at the wide receiver position, I have been banging the drum for Ja'Cory Brooks all season long. 3 games over 20 fantasy points. The game log is outstanding. He's been an absolute target monster. But what we did not expect last week, and it was announced well after I recorded, was that Colin Lacey was active. Colin Lacey was a supremely high volume player at South Alabama last year, was supposedly going to come in as the number 1 in this offense, was not healthy to start the season, played his first game against Notre Dame, 5 catches for 71 yards in that game. He's only $3,400. He is one of the slate's best value wide receivers. You can play him as a stack, play him as a one-off. I'm going to be playing a lot of him because I think that $3,400 price tag, the DraftKings algorithm has not caught up to how good this guy actually is and how good he's actually going to be as a part of this offense. Game number 4 is Pitt heading to Chapel Hill to take on North Carolina. Pitt is 3-point favorites. The game total is 64.5 points. This is the second highest game total on the slate. The projected total is about 34-31 in favor of Pitt, with Pitt being 3-point favorites, which I really think of this game, flash back to the start of the season, I think North Carolina probably would have been at least 1 possession favorites, but injuries to the quarterbacks, North Carolina's defense being very subpar. Now you have Pitt as the favorite. So this to me is a very stackable game. Eli Holstein at $9,000 is one of the top quarterback options on the slate, in my opinion. He's been great so far this season, over 27 fantasy points in every game. A big reason why is because he just seems to always get a ton of volume with his rushing and his passing. Pitt plays at the 2nd fastest tempo in the nation, so they're just getting off more plays, and more plays is going to lead to more opportunities for fantasy points. That's basic math. And so Holstein certainly is going to have plenty of opportunities to put up fantasy points against North Carolina. This is a defense where Alonze Barnett of James Madison threw for 388 yards and 5 touchdowns against them. I don't necessarily know if you need to get that from Holstein, but the potential is certainly there. He runs it a bit as well. Love him as a play this week. I think he's one of the slate's best quarterback plays. Also think with as much volume as you get from this team from the passing game perspective, play him stacked with one of his wide receivers for best results. At the running back spot, Desmond Reed missed the game against Youngstown State. I just think that's going to bring him back fresher for this game. He was the workhorse running back before that, over 23 fantasy points in every game. North Carolina's defense can't stop a nosebleed. Desmond Reed gets used in the passing game as well. Like, just check all of the boxes for Desmond Reed, one of the top running back options on the slate. At the wide receiver position, to me, it's like there's a clear three that are starting to separate themselves among this Pitt receiving room, and it is Kanata Mumpfield, and then Raphael Williams, and then Kenny Johnson. That's the order that I would have it in. Mumpfield is the Akron transfer. He is the guy who is likely to get the most targets, probably the most physically talented receiver of this bunch. I think he is a little bit overpriced based off of his game log for like where he's at in terms of salary, but the upside's there, right? He had the 32 fantasy point game against Cincinnati. He's probably going to be this team's most targeted receiver. Very solid play, very good stacking option with Holstein. And then Raphael Williams Jr. is probably going to be the second most targeted guy, with Kenny Johnson being third. That's just how I see it. That's the way that I would target it. I think that these other guys, they've got really good performances in their game logs, but it's games that were blowouts or games where they just caught one big play. So really those three are going to be the ones that I'm concentrating on. On the UNC side, they are starting Jacoby Criswell at quarterback, and he came into college as a good athlete, dual threat, really like highly touted for his athleticism, but he hasn't really ran a whole lot as the starter for Carolina. He's had 19 and 33 fantasy points in his 2 starts. It's not bad. I think really ideally I would want to play him in a game stack. If I'm already playing Holstein or I'm already playing Reed or Mumpfield, and you want somebody on the North Carolina side, I think it makes a lot of sense to play Criswell as a part of that stack. Or you could play Amarian Hampton as a part of that stack. Amarian Hampton, in my opinion, is the top running back option on the slate. He's had 4 great games out of 5. The Charlotte game, he actually left early. So really every game he's finished has been great. And I just think that he's really likely to put up a lot of numbers. He just is an absolute workhorse back. Cannot stress enough. I think he's the top running back on the slate. At the wide receiver position, it's kind of a mess, but the good news is Jacoby Criswell seems to have his favorite target, and that is J.J. Jones. He's been targeted a total of 17 times in the 2 games that Criswell has started. 13 and 19 fantasy points in those 2 games for J.J. Jones. Pretty solid option at only 5,900. That's probably the only Carolina receiver that I'm interested in. They do have a tight end that's pretty solid, though, in Bryson Nesmith, who's just been consistently a part of the passing game every single week. I don't mind taking a shot at him at $4,400 as well, but I do think there are better value plays out there. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then let's get started with segment number. Now, before we continue, I do want to mention that there are a few places where you can get more information from me. First off, follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I record these shows for the main slate on Tuesday night. They don't kick off till Saturday, so sometimes things change. There's some updates. If you want to see any of my updated opinions or ask any of my updated opinions, reach out to me on Twitter. I'm more than happy to answer any questions if you ask on there. Also, join the Fantasy Corner Discord. I cannot stress this enough. The Fantasy Corner Discord, it is a community of a lot of really good people and really smart people who play DFS for a lot of different sports. We're always talking strategy, plays, lineups in there, and it's always positive discussion. It brings a smile to my face routinely being in there. And I cannot stress enough, if you're looking for a community to be a part of to talk DFS, the Fantasy Corner Discord is the place to go. And we got all sports covered in there, not just college football. And then lastly, if you do want to know who actually makes my DFS lineups, head on over to my Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I post all of my core plays for every single college football DFS slate, including the midweek slates, including the night slates. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. I can't sit here and guarantee that you're going to win thousands of dollars just by playing those plays. It's not that easy. That's not how it works. But I do think that you can get some information from somebody who is well-researched, well-versed in this. And I'm going to go over the X's and O's part of it, the ownership part of it, the game theory part of it, just give you a detailed description on why I'm playing, who I'm playing, which can help you get better at your process for playing college football at DFS. And then also, if you're looking to try anything new this season, head on over to signupexpert.com/Mike's Picks. We're partnered with SignUpExpert, and what they do is they give you the best offers and promo codes for new users on sportsbooks sites, DFS sites, player prop sites, and it syncs to your location to show you what's legal in your state or province. So go check that out if you're looking to try anything new. Give those offers and promo codes a shot. All right, so let's go and pick back up with game number 5, y'all. This is a marathon, not a sprint, with it being 14 games. So, game number 5, we got Wake Forest heading to Raleigh, hour-and-a-half bus ride for the Deeks, and they are currently 4.5-point underdogs. NC State is 4.5-point favorites, with a game total of 55.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 30-26 in favor of NC State. Now, on the Wake Forest side, Hank Bachmeier is the starting quarterback. Wake Forest is a team that plays at a super fast tempo. So this is a very high volume opportunity for Bachmeier. He's priced at $6,000. He's been over 23 fantasy points in 3 out of 4 games. The fourth game was against Ole Miss. NC State is not Ole Miss. NC State's defense has gotten torched by the likes of Tennessee and Clemson. So I do think this is a pretty good spot for Bachmeier. I think this is a pretty good game to stack. Either side of it, this game has some really cheap stacking options that if this game does in fact go nuclear, you're going to get some guys at some very good value. Now, at the running back position for Wake, Damon Claiborne is their guy. He only had 12 carries against Louisiana, did score a touchdown in that game, so he ended up with 18 fantasy points. Tate Carney played a lot of that game. He had 17 carries, but it was because Claiborne left. I think if Claiborne is healthy, he is very clearly the top running back. And I think that last week is kind of just a flash in the pan for Carney. He would need a injury to Claiborne in order to see that same amount of volume. The wide receiver position for Wake, it's actually kind of frustrating to watch. I don't think they're utilizing their wide receivers in the best way. So Taylor Morin is the super experienced, super savvy slot wide receiver who is pretty much always going to end the game with the most targets, but they're not really lucrative targets because they're just these short intermediate routes that he doesn't really break off a whole lot of long plays on. But hey, DraftKings is PPR scoring. He catches you 7 balls for 60 yards in this game, and you're going to be pretty happy camper at the end of the day. I don't mind it at 4,900. Donovan Green should be their alpha wide receiver. In my opinion, he is their best wide receiver. And you saw that in the Virginia game. I watched every minute of that game. He dominated 11 catches, 166 yards, and a touchdown, 36 fantasy points. He was great, and he has the potential to be that every game, but they don't use him like that every game. So I think he is the Wake Forest receiver with the most upside at 4,500. And then you've got Horatio Fields at 4,200, who is kind of a boom or bust guy. I really think that, he hasn't been consistently involved in the offense, but he was the lead receiver against Louisiana. So I don't really know what to make of that. I think that there's a chance that he booms at 4,200. It's worth taking a shot at. And then Deuce Alexander is going to play pretty consistently as well. Those 4 guys all play a ton of snaps. So I don't mind going with any of them. Like I said, there's some really cheap stacking options in this game. I think the one that has the most upside is Donovan Green, so that's going to be the guy that I probably go with more than any of the others. Now, the NC State side is very cheap as well. So first off, their quarterback situation, Grayson McCall is coming in questionable for this game. I don't think he plays. I think it is much more likely that you see the freshman CJ Bailey. And Bailey has been, watching him play, he has a lot of talent. He can make some big time throws, but he also misses some layups, misses some short throws. There's just some head scratcher decisions too. He's $5,100 at the end of the day though. I don't think he's the best quarterback out there. I don't think he's the best DFS play out there, but he's $5,100 and they're implied for 30 points in this game. So somebody on this team is mispriced. Somebody on this team is going to be valued. There's no way that they can score 4 touchdowns and somebody not be a supreme value at the end of the day. So $5,100 for CJ Bailey, if he throws for 2 touchdowns, that's 8 fantasy points right there. You only need 175 passing yards after that in order for him to hit value. And he can do more with his legs too. He can score touchdowns with his legs. He got 2 on the season. So I think there's a really case to be made that he could be one of the slate's best value plays at the quarterback position. At the running back spot, we mentioned somebody has to hit value. It's going to be the one that scores the touchdown because right now it's a 3-way committee that is pretty darn even. Last week, Jordan Waters and Hollywood Smothers had 8 carries with Kendrick Raphael having 7. Like I said, whoever scores the touchdown is going to be the one that ends up being the fantasy play you want. I would prefer to not have to predict this situation. But again, this team is implied to score 30 points. That means they're implied to score about 4 touchdowns. If one of these backs gets 2 of them, they're going to be one of the slate's best value plays. My money would be on Smothers. I think he is the most talented of the group. He runs really hard. He's the one that I've been the most impressed with watching them. Waters is just kind of a plotter, but he was supposed to be their guy at the start of the season. We saw a big game out of him against Western Carolina. And then Raphael's been a career backup, so I have the least interest in him. At the wide receiver position, NC State does have Kevin Concepcion, and if you've been sitting here, me talk about all these players, and you're like, Mike, this is great. This team has all this value. Well, what can I spend up on? Kevin Concepcion's a guy that you could spend up on. He has been pretty quiet since week 1 where he had the 40 fantasy point performance against Western Carolina, but he is one of the best receivers in college football. He is this offense's target leader. He's just good, and they use him in creative ways to get him the football very easily, no matter who's at quarterback. I think he is probably one of the slate's biggest sleepers at wide receiver. I don't think a lot of people are going to play him. I am going to be playing him. They also have Dakari Collins, Noah Rodgers, and Justin Jolly who play a ton of snaps. And like I said, with the running backs, it's going to come down to who scores the touchdowns. Like at the end of the day for this NC State team, if you're able to predict who scores the touchdowns, you're going to end up getting a really solid value play. Next up, we have Purdue heading to Madison to take on Wisconsin. And Wisconsin is currently 14.5-point favorites, game total of 46.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 30-16 in favor of the Badgers. For Purdue, they're really weird because they're supposedly an air raid team, but they don't throw the ball a whole lot. Hudson Card was great against FCS competition, hasn't topped 9 fantasy points since. Pass. At the running back position, Devin Mockabee is their guy. 13 carries last week against Nebraska. Only turned it into 6.5 fantasy points, but he does have upside if they're able to stay in this game and get the run game going. Reggie Love is not bad either. He had 10 carries in that game, so I do think it is a 1A, 1B situation with Mockabee and Love. I typically don't like playing guys in committees like this, but at only $4,000 and $3,400 with an inept passing game, if somebody from Purdue is going to score a touchdown, it's probably Mockabee or Love. In the passing game, they've got a lot of injuries to receivers. Max Clare is the tight end. He is their best weapon in the passing game. I'm still just not super interested in this Purdue passing game. On the Wisconsin side, they are starting Braden Lockett at quarterback again. I would rather play Bachmeier or Bailey in a better game environment where I think that they're better players. So Lockett is a pass for me at 5,400. At running back, so I like the idea of both of these guys against Purdue, but it's a full-blown committee. Last week, Ches Malusi and Tui Walker. It was Tui Walker with 12 carries, ended up with 17 fantasy points because he got the 2 touchdowns, and it was Malusi with 10 carries, 3.2 fantasy points, did not score a touchdown. So it's a committee. It's a 50-50 split. You're going to be placing a bet on who scores the touchdowns. Pass for me. At the wide receiver position, I am going to buy low on Will Pauling. So Will Pauling is a target monster in this offense. He did have 7 targets against USC. Downside is he only caught 2 of them, but he's really the only guy that's getting consistent targets, and he had a clear rapport with Braden Lockett last year when he started. So I do think that Will Pauling is a guy that we can buy low on at $4,500. I'm not super interested in anybody else. Yeah, Vinny Anthony had the big play last week against USC, but that was really all he did. So it's hard to get excited outside of that. All right, game number 7. We have got UCLA heading to Happy Valley to take on Penn State. Currently, Penn State is 27.5-point favorites with a total of 44.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 36-9 in favor of Penn State, which renders the UCLA offense they're projected to score 9 points. To me, they are entirely unplayable. Ethan Garber's the starting quarterback, might be out, and Justin Martin might be the starter. At running back, TJ Harden is the workhorse, and he does see usage in the passing game, but Penn State's a really good run defense, so pass. At the wide receiver spot, they just don't have enough consistent passing volume to really consider any of them at this point. This is an offense that I think you can comfortably full fade. If I were to play anybody, it would be TJ Harden. At the on the other side of this game, Penn State, let's talk about quarterback first, then running back. So Drew Aller has been good this season. I really kind of hated on him at the start of the season. He's kind of proved me wrong, right? But here's the problem with playing Drew Aller in DFS. Penn State currently has the 9th highest rush rate in the nation, which when you consider that there are 3 service academies that run exclusively triple option, and then you have teams like UNLV who just are terrified to throw, to be 9th on that list, this is a team that's running the football a lot, and I think that lack of passing volume is going to really hurt Drew Aller's fantasy prospects. I'm just not that interested in him at $8,200 when he's only going to throw 20 passes a game. At the running back spot, we mentioned how they do run the football a lot. Well, they've got 2 guys that run it a ton. This is a pure 50-50 split in the backfield. Last week, Nick Singleton had 16 carries, ended up with 19.9 fantasy points. Katron Allen had 18 carries, ended up with 19.2 fantasy points. When this run game is humming, you can play both of these guys. So here's what's interesting about them, though. You know they're going to be pretty close to 50-50 on the carries, and so theoretically you would want to go with the cheaper one, which would be Katron Allen. However, Nick Singleton is certainly more likely to break off a long, explosive run play, so that is why he is priced up more. So I kind of think that the pricing is pretty fair on DraftKings' part. I definitely think that I'm going to be playing both of them in my lineups, but just not in the same line. At the wide receiver spot for Penn State, Tyler Warren is their tight end. He's actually the one I have the most interest in. He's their most consistent target earner. He also gets used as a wildcat quarterback. We saw him run for a touchdown last week out of that. We saw him throw out of it against Kent State. This is an interesting kind of gimmick. He's kind of turning into like a Taysom Hill type player. At $5,600, I'm definitely willing to take a shot at that. He's not one of my favorite plays on the slate, but I don't think that that's a bad price tag considering you're going to get the targets, you're going to get the wildcat usage, and those are usually in the red zones. There's certainly a very high touchdown equity with Tyler Warren. Next up, we have Auburn heading to Athens to take on the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia is 24-point favorites with a game total of 53.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 39-15 in favor of the Dogs. For Auburn, Peyton Thorne is back at starting quarterback. And y'all, I had Auburn in a parlay last week where I just had them money line to beat Oklahoma. I was feeling pretty good about them up 4 with about 5 minutes left with the football. And then Peyton Thorne Peyton Thorne, like that's what he does. He's going to kill you with a heartbreaking turnover. And really this week, I know that he's starting. He's definitely the better option among the two starters, but I can't get behind this price tag taking on Georgia. He's going to need 21 fantasy points. I just don't see a way in which he gets 21 fantasy points against this Georgia defense. He is not Jalen Milroe. So I just am not interested in him at that price tag. I think there's much better points per dollar options out there. At the running back spot, I do think Jarquez Hunter is interesting. He is their workhorse running back. There's no real committee or anything like that. Georgia's run defense has been really good, but like Jarquez Hunter is a really talented player. You give him 20 cracks at it, he might break a long one. So I don't think that a lot of people are going to be playing him. I think he could be a very interested low-owned pivot player at running back this week. At the wide receiver spot, my only interest is in Keandre Lambert-Smith. He continues to just break off long touchdowns for this offense, which, really that's going to be your best hope against Georgia is one long touchdown and it turns into 13 fantasy points, and that's what you got out of him, right? So really he's the main guy that I'm looking at in this offense. Now on the Georgia side, they got Carson Beck at quarterback, and look, I just think he's too expensive. So you think back to that Alabama game. Yes, he did have 31 fantasy points, but let's think about why he had 31 fantasy points. They went down in that game 28-0, and pretty much the entire second half were running no huddle and throwing the ball every single play. And when that happens, yeah, you're going to get a big performance out of Carson Beck, over 400 yards and 3 touchdowns, right? So I just don't think that Auburn is going to do anything to kind of ignite this game environment like that and cause Georgia to go into that pass-happy mode and play a lot of passing volume. So I think down the road, it might be wiser to play Carson Beck in games where Georgia is likely to be down or get pushed. I don't think that this is one of those games. At the running back position, Trevor Etienne would have my interest because he is this team's workhorse running back, but he's expensive. $7,000. I just think there's better points per dollar plays out there. At the wide receiver spot for Georgia, it's kind of a mess. It's just hard to predict who's going to go off. Like you do have Lovett, the guy out of the slot, who very steady against Alabama, but didn't score a touchdown, and so it didn't turn into a big fantasy game. Dylan Bell had a big-time game, 10 targets, caught 5 of them for 100 yards and a touchdown, 30 fantasy points in that game. And then Arian Smith is their big play guy who had a really big game against Alabama as well. 8 targets, caught 6 of them, 132, and a touchdown for 28 fantasy points. Colby Young is a Miami transfer. He plays a lot as well. They were really trying to feed him the ball near the end of the game if you watch that game. So to me, that definitely says something about his usage, that they trust him in big situations. They're going to use him in the red zone as a weapon. So like some combination of those 4 guys, like one of them might go off, but I don't really feel like trying to predict which one. I think there's better value plays out there at the wide receiver position. Now, next up, we've got Ole Miss taking on South Carolina. Ole Miss is 9.5-point favorites with a game total of 52.5 points, meaning that the implied total is about 31-21 in favor of the Running Rebels. So Ole Miss, we mentioned how heading into the Kentucky game, how they had been largely untested. Well, now they've been tested because that game was an L. So really, I don't know what to make of this offense for the rest of the season based off of that Kentucky game because they did not look good. Jackson Dart only put up 16 fantasy points. So are we going to get the Jackson Dart that, was just running the offense like a hot knife through butter the first 4 weeks of the season? Or are we going to get the Jackson Dart who only put up 16 fantasy points against Kentucky? That's a lot of salary to pay to find out at $9,900. I just think there's better options on this slate. I'm going to wait and see what Dart does this week before I go back to him. However, I do think you can play some guys as one-off pieces on this offense. Henry Parrish is their very clear workhorse running back. He was actually kind of solid against Kentucky, ended up with 17 fantasy points in that game. It's not bad. And then at the wide receiver position, Trey Harris is just a supreme target monster, had 15 targets against Kentucky. This is his third straight game with over 11 catches. He's caught at least 8 catches in every single game this season, which is just an absurd stat. I think he is very clearly the top wide receiver play on the slate. I think you can play him as a one-off play. And, we mentioned earlier all those cheap options in some of the early games. And, if you save enough salary, you can afford to play this guy as a one-off play. And I think it's a really smart, really sharp play. Look, Ole Miss, the way they played offense last week, they played offense like the one guy playing in your College Football 25 online dynasty who was trying to win the Heisman Trophy with his wide receiver, like just throwing it to him every play, just feeding him the ball, feeding him the ball, feeding him the ball, right? So if they're going to continue doing that, then we need to continue playing him in DFS. And I think you can do that unstacked and feel pretty comfortable with it. On the South Carolina side, they're not a great offense, but they get their starting quarterback back this week, Lenora Sellers. He left the LSU game at halftime with 23 fantasy points. This is a guy who has a lot of rushing upside. They are going to use him as a runner quite a bit. $5,800, that's a very cheap price tag for a guy who's probably going to get 15 carries, probably going to get 75 rushing yards, maybe score a touchdown. I think he's a pretty darn solid option. I don't necessarily like this game as a stacking opportunity because of how expensive Jackson Dart is, but I do think Lenora Sellers is a really good option on the South Carolina side. At the running back position, Rocket Sanders left the Akron game early. It is TBD what is going to happen with him. He will be the workhorse back if he is active. Otherwise, it would be some combination of Attaway and McDowell. Attaway did see more carries against Akron than McDowell did. They're listed as an or on the depth chart, though. I do think Sanders, if I had to guess, I think Sanders is going to play. I don't think he's a terrible play if he plays, but I don't think he's a great play either. At the wide receiver position, the only one that interests me is Gage Larvadain. So this is a guy that was a transfer from Miami, Ohio last year. Yeah, that's right. All those MAC receivers, pretty much every MAC school had their wide receiver one transfer in the offseason. Anyway, Gage Larvadain, I think he profiles as an alpha. 2 catches for 79 yards against Akron. He is listed as a starter on the depth chart now. $4,000, that's not a whole lot to find out if a guy is an alpha or not. And so he has my interest for that reason. All right, let's go ahead and take a quick breather, and then we're going to end it with the last set of games. Just a quick reminder, if this video helps you guys out in any way, please help me out and hit the like button on YouTube, rate and review if you're listening on the audio. I cannot stress enough how much those help me out, and I really do appreciate it. Helps the podcast grow, helps it continue to reach a bigger audience. I'm over 700 subscribers now, and I want to make it to 800, and so the only way I can do that is if you guys hit the like button, rate and review, comment, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel because, I say that I want to get closing on 800, but I probably got 80 people out there watching right now that could hit that subscribe button and get me to 800 right away. So I really do appreciate when you guys do that. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about this next game, Virginia Tech at Stanford. Virginia Tech is 8-point favorites with a total of 49.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 29-21 in favor of the Hokies. For Virginia Tech, Kyron Drones has dual threat upside. We saw that in the game against Old Dominion where he put up 30 fantasy points. Against Miami, he showed a little bit of that as well, but really just never broke off like a big explosive play in that Miami game, which is kind of what limited his fantasy upside, only scoring 19.76 fantasy points. I think he's a little overpriced, but he's got a ton of upside. Just because he's a dual threat, because he can run, he's probably going to make my player pool, but probably not a big part of it. At running back, Basil Tubin is one of the biggest workhorse running backs on the slate. In terms of a production standpoint, he's been outstanding this season. Over 23 fantasy points in every game, scored a touchdown in every game. Just outstanding play, right? However, the Stanford run defense has been no joke. They held LaQuint Allen to 8 carries for 25 yards, Phil Maffa for 10 carries for 58 yards. So I tend to think that people aren't going to know that. And so I tend to think that he's going to come in over-owned. And I think that makes it really easy to fade him if he's going to come in at high ownership against this tough run defense. At the wide receiver position, it's really just a mess for Virginia Tech. It's really a touchdown or bust situation. You got Jalen Lane, you got Daquan Felton, you got Benji Gosnell, you got his brother Steven Gosnell, who are from about 45 minutes where I'm from. Really just it's touchdown or bust. If you play the guy that scores a touchdown, you're going to be happy. If you play a guy who doesn't score a touchdown, you're not going to be happy. Now, onto the Stanford side. So Ashton Daniels is going to be the starter. He kind of got pulled late in that game against Clemson, but I do think he's going to be the starter again this week. I haven't seen any indication otherwise. He's a dual threat as well. He's probably going to get double-digit rushing attempts. But for some reason against Clemson, he was only 5,800 in this game. He is 7,400. I see no reason that they upped his price tag by $1,600. And so he's probably a pass for me unless I'm looking to game stack this game up. At the running back spot, we mentioned on the night slate last week how Chris Davis Jr. had been the guy in the backfield 2 games ago against Syracuse. But now last game against Clemson, it was Micah Ford who was the guy, 15 carries, 122 yards against that defense. It's pretty impressive. So look, they seem to be just riding the hot hand at running back. You don't have to spend a lot of money on him. Micah Ford is only $4,100. So if he's able to kind of have any of that success that he had last game, I think he's a pretty solid player. At the wide receiver position, Alec Ayamaner is their target machine. He is their best wide receiver. He's one of the best wide receivers in the country, just a big body physical specimen who's going to play on Sundays. I think he's a really solid play. I cannot stress enough how I just think that as the season goes on, he's going to have some huge games just because of the physical jump ball threat that he poses. And I'm going to continue to play him so that way when he has those big games, I can cash in. Emmett Mosley, true freshman, came out of nowhere last week against Clemson, 7 catches, 48 yards, and a touchdown. I don't know if this is a sign of things to come. It could be. If it is, he is a very solid play at $4,700. What his playing time did was it significantly reduced Ismail Cisse and Tiger Bachmeier. They were pretty much useless in that Clemson game. So I really think moving forward, it's going to be Ayamaner and then Mosley as the 2 receivers that you want for the Stanford offense. Next up, we've got Iowa taking on Ohio State. Ohio State is 20.5-point favorites with a game total of 44.5, meaning the projected score is about 32-12 in favor of the Buckeyes. Look, for Iowa, I could not be less interested in Cade McNamara. He has not topped 6 fantasy points against an FBS opponent this season. He has not topped 2 fantasy points against a Big Ten opponent this season. Just pass. It's still Iowa. At the running back position, Caleb Johnson has been their best offensive player, maybe their best player on both sides of the ball so far this season, over 28 fantasy points in every game. He's been just elite. But this Ohio State defense is going to be the best one that he's played. I don't know what to make of that. If he were priced at about $7,000 instead of $8,600, I would probably have a lot of interest. But I think $8,600 is just too much to pay when I could just have a guy like Amarian Hampton or a Desmond Reed for a similar price tag where they don't have a significantly difficult matchup. At the wide receiver spot for Iowa, I'm not even going to entertain that. Let's go ahead and move to the Ohio State side. So Ohio State, I'm going to continue to bang the drum for Will Howard. At Kansas State, he had some dual threat upside. He had some really big games. And really, as the Ohio State season goes on, you're going to see him run more. You're going to see him get more passing volume because he's going to be in games longer. He's not going to get to just sub out at halftime, right? And so against Michigan State, set his season high in pass attempts, set his season high in rush attempts, scored a rushing touchdown, which we talked about on the show. So I do think that he's got a decent amount of upside. However, this Iowa defense is probably not the one to target it against, but I just wanted to go ahead and kind of plant that seed moving forward that Will Howard is going to be a guy that I'm going to be interested in as the season goes on because I think the way he is used is going to change. At the running back spot, it is still a committee between Judkins and Henderson. However, Judkins is the clear leader. Last week, he did have 11 carries against Michigan State, whereas Travion Henderson only had 7. Pretty much he's out-carrying Travion Henderson on the regular now, so Judkins is the guy that I would have interest in. But look, I can't pay $7,700 on DraftKings for a guy who is in a committee and is going up against Iowa, so he's a pass this week. At the wide receiver spot, so like I said last week, Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka are playing to their profiles. Jeremiah Smith is a super talented, deep ball type wide receiver who's going to get targets deep down the field that are very lucrative. And then Emeka Egbuka is going to get the short, intermediate, underneath targets and is more of a volume-based play. I think against the Iowa defense, I would be more inclined to take Egbuka because you can dink and dunk on this Iowa team. We've seen teams do it before. So I do have a little bit of interest in Egbuka and a little bit of a fade on Jeremiah Smith for me this week. Next up, we have the game with the slate's highest total, West Virginia taking on Oklahoma State. Currently, the Pokes are 4-point favorites with a game total of 65.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 35-31 in favor of Oklahoma State. Now, on the West Virginia side, got to talk about Garrett Green. He is very reasonably priced, in my opinion. This is a guy last year that we saw have multiple 40 fantasy point games. So we know that the upside is there. He's also had 232 or more fantasy point games so far this season, which that's 4 times value for his salary. That's a really good return. And Oklahoma State has given up 2 games of 30-plus fantasy points to 2 mobile quarterbacks so far this season, Taylon Green and Avery Johnson. Everything lines up for Garrett Green to have a successful week this week. Now, we've seen this with Oklahoma State before. Pretty much if you just stacked every game they've been in this season, you would probably be profitable for the entire season. And really, they play in a way that makes games super stackable. They play at a very fast tempo. They are not good defensively, and they throw the ball a ton. And so you're just going to get a ton of plays in those games, and a ton of plays against a bad defense results in a lot of fantasy points. So I do think Garrett Green at $8,000 is one of my favorite quarterback plays on the entire slate. At the running back position, again, much like with Smith and Ibuka, these guys are playing to their profile, in my opinion. Jaheim White is more of the explosive player type, and CJ Donaldson is more of just the volume-based plotter. Well, they both only got 6 carries against Kansas. So if you're going to be giving me a 50-50 split, I would prefer to play the more explosive player, which is White. However, I don't think you even have to play the situation if you don't want to, but you might want to because Oklahoma State has given up some big games to running back so far this season, like DJ Giddens and Jaquindon Jackson. So I would probably take a few shots at Jaheim White this week, if I'm being honest. At the wide receiver spot for West Virginia, because of how much Garrett Green runs and because of how much they run the running backs, it's been kind of a crapshoot the last 2 years. But Hudson Clement has had games where he's looked like the guy. He had a few last year, and he had one this year against Kansas where he had 7 catches on 9 targets for 150 yards, 25 fantasy points in that game. If you're going to stack Garrett Green with anybody, he would be the guy to do it with, and he certainly has the most upside. I'm also going to continue to hype up Cole Taylor, the West Virginia tight end, who I drafted in quite a few best ball drafts. He's a guy that they certainly look to in the red zone, and I would certainly be interested in for that reason. He's only $3,400, so the second he catches you a touchdown, he's instantly going to return value. On the Oklahoma State side, like I said, this team is playing in some super stackable games, and it's stackable on their side as well. Alan Bowman, to me, is a sneaky play because everybody thinks that, they have Ollie Gordon. All they do is run the ball. Alan Bowman's not a good player. He's not flashy. He's $7,600, and in DFS, we don't care how you score the fantasy points as long as you score the fantasy points. And so he can do that. I think this is a very viable game to stack with the quarterback on both sides. And I'm going to be interested in playing Alan Bowman. I got to be honest. We mentioned how this team throws the ball a lot. Well, they actually ranked 4th in the nation in pass rate. And so that's a big reason why you've seen Ollie Gordon's production go down this season. He's just not gotten the same volume this year that he had near the middle to end of last season. However, he is still Ollie Gordon. He is still one of the most talented running backs in the country. I think that as he continues to kind of tank and DraftKings continues to not adjust his salary, it has been adjusted on FanDuel, by the way, but as DraftKings continues to not adjust his salary, he's going to get less and less ownership and less people play him, which to me, I kind of want to play Ollie Gordon in a leverage spot. And so he is going to make my player pool this week. Probably not going to be a big time play, but he is going to be in my player pool. We mention this in DFS all the time, that a bad play can occasionally become a good play when nobody's on it and he happens to go off. Well, who's more likely to go off than Ollie Gordon? Not a whole lot of guys. And so if nobody's going to be on it, I will be willing to be on it for a guy that we've seen do it time and time again. At the wide receiver spot, I think that really it's starting to condense even more. We mentioned at the start of the season how it was condensing around 3 guys. Now it's starting to condense around 2. If you're looking at targets, Presley is always going to be the leader in targets. He's just a slot who is a target machine. One of the most targeted receivers in all of college football last year. That's going to be the case quite often. Stribling is more of the explosive play, big play type of guy. And when you look at the game totals, Presley has led the receivers in scoring in 3 out of 5 games. Stribling has led it in 2 out of 5 games. If you were to double stack both of them, then it would actually have been profitable or actually viable in terms of a value perspective in both of the games where Stribling led as the lead receiver. So really what this boils down to for me is if you're going to play Presley, play him single stacked or double stacked with Stribling. If you're playing Stribling alone, I think that's an option as well. I think Presley alone is an option, works well, but really those 2 are the only combination of 2 guys that I'm going with. Rashad Owens hasn't really given you a super GPP viable score in really any of the games yet. All right, now next up, we've got Rutgers taking on Nebraska. Currently, Nebraska is 7-point favorites with a game total of 41.5 points, meaning the implied total is about 24-17 in favor of the Cornhuskers. For Rutgers, I just have no interest in Ethan Kaliak-Manis. Pass. Kyle Monangai is their running back. He is their workhorse, over 25 attempts in the last 3 games. Nebraska's going to be the best rush defense he's played, though. A little expensive for my taste, but I do like the upside that you can get with him. At the wide receiver spot, you've got some super cheap plays. Demir Miller, $4,600, has been their best receiver all season long. Isaiah Strong scored the touchdown for them against Washington last week, 15 fantasy points in back-to-back games. Definitely like him as a value at $3,800. And then Kenny Fletcher, the tight end, is also a considerable part of the passing attack. So really, I think you can play these receivers as one-off plays and get away with it because they don't need a whole lot to hit value. At the quarterback position for Nebraska, you're getting a super good price tag on Dylan Raiola, but I just don't think this game against Rutgers is the spot to target him. Rutgers is just going to look to muck everything up, make the game slow, make it ugly, and that's not what we want in DFS. At the running back position, Dante Dowdell was a big-time disappointment for me last week. I played him a ton, and he just didn't do a whole lot in what was supposed to be a great matchup against Purdue. Unfortunately, this still looks like it's going to be a committee, and so I'm probably avoiding the running back position here on this slate, and we'll look to catch back up with them when they've got a better matchup or a more clear workload strategy. At the wide receiver position, Nair is still the highest price guy, but I think Banks is the guy that you want to play. 6 targets against Purdue, caught 5 of them for 82 yards and a touchdown. From his time at Wake Forest, he is a big play guy. At $3,800 for a guy who can break off 2 or 3 big plays in an instant. Love him as a value play here on this slate. Also, do not discount Ja'Cory Barney. He is like their gadget play guy that they'll get the ball to on jet sweeps and screens, which are lucrative touches because A, especially if you're getting a catch for him, that's an instant point, but B, they're designed touches. So you don't have to worry about him earning targets. And, he makes a few guys miss in the open field and he's got a big play on his hands, which is exactly what happened against Purdue, turned into 17 fantasy points. Banks and Barney as cheap receivers for Nebraska really do interest me in this game. Now, last game of the day, we've got Alabama heading to Nashville to take on Vanderbilt. Alabama, new number 1 team in the country. They are 23-point favorites in this game with a game total of 55.5 points, meaning the projection is about 39-16 in favor of the Crimson Tide. On the Alabama side, they boast the slate's best quarterback, and that is Jalen Milroe. If you were to ask me, hey, Mike, who's the quarterback who's going to finish this slate with the most fantasy points? It's Jalen Milroe. However, he's also the most expensive. So you got a little bit of give and take there, right? But he's been great in every game this season. You need about 31 fantasy points from him to hit value. Well, guess what? He's had 3 out of 4 games where he's top 39 fantasy points. He's likely to see double-digit carries. He's likely to score at least 1 rushing touchdown. Love him as a play. I think you can play him stacked or unstacked, and I think he's just the slate's best quarterback. At the running back spot, Justice Haynes and Jen Miller, near 50-50 committee. They might not play the whole game because it's a blowout. They're both above $6,000 pass. At the wide receiver spot, Ryan Williams was like a revelation last week, which, by the way, I'm changing my player comp. Last week, my player comp for Ryan Williams was Robbie Anderson. And watching him play that Georgia game, I'm changing it. It's Victor Cruz now. He just kind of moves the way Victor Cruz used to when he was in his prime. That's who he reminds me of. Either way, he was great against Georgia. I think you're going to see a big-time ownership jump on Ryan Williams because everybody saw that play. Everybody knows him now, and everybody's going to be looking to play him. So I would rather play the lower-owned guy that I think is going to come out of this, which is Jeremy Bernard. I think he is going to be this team's alpha receiver when it's all said and done, and he's certainly going to be lower-owned than Ryan Williams because of how that game played out last week. Now, on the Vanderbilt side, they boast a mobile quarterback that we are quite familiar with, Diego Pavia, from his days at New Mexico State. Look, he's pretty good. He's only $6,800. The Bama defense, if anything we learned last week, it's that when teams get desperate and go no huddle and start throwing it all over the yard, they can be exploited a little bit. And Pavia is a guy who can throw it and run it a little bit as well. I don't think he's a bad play at $6,800. And because of the fact that both these quarterbacks are mobile, I could see a legitimate strategy where you just play Pavia and Milroe and nobody else from this game and see that working because I think these two quarterbacks are just fantasy point factories. At the running back position, Cedric Alexander is their guy. Not exactly the way I think you're going to want to target this Alabama defense, though. And at the wide receiver position, super spread out target shares. Skinner and Sherrill are the 2 starters out wide. But Eli Stowers has really turned into the number 1 receiving weapon. So get this, he actually used to be a quarterback at New Mexico State who was Diego Pavia's backup, came with Pavia and a few of the assistant coaches to Vanderbilt, switched to tight end, and is now this team's best passing weapon. And I think part of that comes from the fact that he knows where Diego Pavia likes to go with the football, right? So he's seen 17 and 10 targets in the last 2 games. Yes, I'm not making that up. 27 total targets in the last 2 games. Scored 41.7 fantasy points in those 2 games. He's only $4,000 here on this one. Makes for a very reasonable stacking partner with Diego Pavia and a decent wide receiver value play at only $4,000. But all right, y'all, that is going to do it for this slate. And I did keep it under an hour this time. I kept it about 6 minutes shorter than last time, which I'm very proud of, considering that it was a game bigger than last time. So anyway, if this video helped you out in any way, please hit the like button. Please consider subscribing to the channel so that we can be with us for the rest of the college football season. But I hope this video gave you guys everything you needed, all the information you needed to build some winning lineups for the Saturday main slate. Check out the Thursday video if you've not already. Check out our PGA Tour Sanderson Farms Championship video if you've not already also. And then upcoming later this week, we have got the Friday slate and the Saturday night slate. So make sure you're subscribed so you can get access to those. But like I said, y'all, hopefully I gave you guys all you need to build some winning lineups on Saturday. Best of luck to you guys this Saturday. Don't do what I did last week. Narrow down your player pool, find your guys, play your guys. Don't try to play everybody on the slate. But anyway, that's all I got for this episode, guys. So thank you guys for watching and listening to this point. Best of luck to you guys on Saturday, and I will see you guys next time.